And now, if I can, I think the next thing we wanted to talk about, and Kelly, if you wanted to restart recording, and then we can have Jim talk to us a little bit about the solid waste landfill PFAS evaluation, a question that kind of rose from the last meeting that we had back in July. And Jim, I can run the slides, or if you want to show your slide deck, and I can turn my screen off, whatever your pleasure.
You can drive.
All right.
Are we all set?
Yep.
All right. Well, as Steve mentioned, my name is Jim Ardwin. I'm the geology coordinator with the solid waste section and materials management division. My primary role with the division is to do licensing and permitting. I also train new geologists as they come on and help district staff when they get a little overwhelmed with the geological work that they have. I also do special projects, which is why I'm here tonight speaking to you. Talk a little bit about our solid waste landfill PFAS evaluation. First thing I guess I wanted to cover is, within MMD, what does our solid waste landfill universe consist of? There are all kinds of old dump sites across the state, and from my division's perspective, we're dealing primarily with landfills that were permitted or licensed under state law in Michigan. So, think of your more modern household trash landfills, construction demolition debris landfills, ash that's generated at the power plants as well. We do have some other miscellaneous sites that somehow ended up under our umbrella, but primarily we're dealing with permitted and licensed facilities. All told, we have about 145 landfill sites that we monitor. Next slide, please. So I'm going to talk a little bit about what we've done so far in MMD, what we're currently doing, and what's next for my division. Next. So back in early 2019, my division sat down and came up with our primary goal as it relates to PFAS here. By the end of 2019, we wanted to have all of our solid waste sites that we regulate, that we determined were high priority, to be sampled. So the first obvious question is, what did we determine to be high priority? So next slide. So our 145 sites, the first thing to remember though is that we have a lot of information on these sites. They're all, we've been monitoring many of these sites for decades. They have groundwater monitoring walls around them. We have a pretty good idea of the groundwater impacts at them or not. We have a pretty good idea of the geology, lithology beneath these sites. We understand the groundwater flow direction around them. So we had a pretty good data set to start with. But the first question we asked of these sites was, do they have a known groundwater impact? And if the answer was no, they stayed low priority for now. If the answer was yes, we bumped them up to at least the medium priority bucket. The next question that we asked was whether or not we knew of any drinking water wells that were near these sites or surface water intakes that might be used for drinking water. We kind of took the bullseye approach, anything within about a couple mile radius of the site. If there was something in that range, we figured it was something we needed to pursue a little further. So we bumped those sites up into our high priority bucket. And then the last question we asked was, based on the waste type, did the waste that they took in, was it likely to have PFAS parameters in it? And for the most part, the answer is going to be yes with these landfills. But we do have one, subgroup of landfills that we thought that it probably was not likely, and that was landfills that took 100% ash, or you might hear it called coal combustion residual, CCR sites. So even in a case where we had groundwater impact and maybe we had some drinking water wells within a couple miles of the site, if it was 100% ash site, we put them back down to medium priority. Just primarily because we needed to make this something that we could get our arms around the number of sites, especially given our aggressive schedule. So in the end, we ended up with 42 sites that were low priority, sites that weren't impacted, 55 sites in the medium priority group, sites that we knew had groundwater impact, but we didn't think drinking water was likely to be at risk near them. And then 48 sites that were high priority. We knew they had groundwater impacts. We believe they had drinking water wells or intakes nearby. Next slide, please. So we started all this back at the beginning of 2019. Middle of 2019, we sent out letters to all these sites requesting that they do PFAS sampling. We didn't ask that they sample all the wells around the landfill, but we asked them to sample select wells. Because we had so much information on these sites, we knew which wells were impacted historically. So we focused on the wells that we felt were most likely to be impacted, and we also asked them to do a well that we knew shouldn't be impacted based on our knowledge of the site. So an up gradient well and down gradient impacted wells. So we sent these letters out asking them to sample, and in the end of those 48 sites, 42 of the responsible parties went out and did their sampling and got data back to us by the end of 2019. We have one site that we're still in the enforcement process with, that we're still hopeful that we can get them to sample so we don't have to pay taxpayer dollars on it. But we do have 5 sites that we need to go out and sample, and we're in the process of getting a contract in place to do that. Next slide, please. So what did we find? We had data on 42 sites. 11 of those sites actually exceeded the old criteria. 18 of the sites had data that fell between the old criteria and the new criteria. So that's our new criteria. So we have 29 of those 42 sites that are now MPART sites as a result of this sampling effort. And we also had 13 clean sites. Next slide, please. So that's about 70% of the sites that we looked at. These are sites, again, we knew they had groundwater impacts. These are, landfills. They have waste that contains PFAS chemicals. 70% of them ended up being an MPART site, and they're going to have to deal with the PFAS impacts moving forward. Next slide. So what's next for those high priority sites? Next slide. First and foremost, we work with the health departments on potential drinking water well sampling. In most of the cases in those sites, that's already been done. There's still a few sites that I know we're actively working with the health departments to get a few wells sampled. In addition to that, this is the same as any other parameter from a investigation standpoint. They need to delineate the groundwater impacts at these sites, and they need to potentially do feasibility studies and remedial action plans at these sites. Many of the sites, all of these sites were somewhere in the process to start with. They had groundwater impacts. So some of them were just at the beginning of the process. They might still be delineating the plume that they knew about. Other sites had actually made it all the way through the process. They figured out the extent of the contamination. They figured out a remedial action that would work for the contaminants that they knew about, and they implemented it. And now they need to go back and reevaluate. So depending on where they are in the site, where they are in the process, the site will have to figure out, and we'll help them figure out how they move forward. But in cases where they've made it all the way to the end, they're going to have to go back and reevaluate the plans they have in place and see if they still work. They need to see if they still have delineation of the plume. So there's a lot of work on the ground that still needs to happen at these sites. And then, of course, we're going to continue to support the MPART process, community meetings as needed, and updates to the web content and things like that. Next slide. So we've talked about the high priority sites. So what about those medium priority sites? Next slide. So all these medium priority sites are all going to need to be addressed at some point. They too had groundwater impacts. They were pursuing those impacts, looking at the contaminants that they were aware of, but we're going to have to find out whether PFAS is going to be a player at them as well. We have started sending out sampling request letters to those sites, but when we pursue that is going to be district specific. It's going to depend on, the workloads that our individual geologists have out in the districts. Our initial goal is to have all these sites sampled by the end of next year. But, I'll be honest with you, there's a lot of work happening out there right now on these high priority sites in addition to our normal work. So there's a potential that might slip a little bit. Next slide. And then we had the low priority sites. What about those? Because these sites didn't have groundwater impacts, we're not recommending PFAS sampling at this time. But all of these sites do routine groundwater sampling for other parameters. And if that analysis indicates that we have some kind of groundwater impact occurring, certainly at that point in time, we would recommend that PFAS sampling be completed. So that's kind of what I had for you tonight as far as a summary of where MMD is at with regard to our PFAS initiative. So if you had any questions, I'd be happy to take those at this point.
Steve, I have a question.
Go ahead.
Okay. You focus on drinking water, and that makes sense for going on the first blush. But in Wayne County, some of the issues that we have, if we've got probably the most, well, I know we have the most landfills of any other county in the state. We've got unlined landfills very close to the lower Rouge River. People fish on the Rouge River. They eat fish. I would say you should expand it to not just include drinking water, but expand it to rivers where people fish. Also, drinking water, you talk about that being important. The city of Wyandotte in August of 2019 had major hits of PFAS, and the people drank it, and they could not do anything to treat it. So I think if there's any focus here, Jim, it's got to be on the county with the most landfills, probably the most unlined landfills, the people that eat fish off the river, both the Detroit River and the Rouge River. And then finally, the city of Wyandotte's drinking water. There was supposed to be some analysis done on that, and nothing ever came out after that. There was supposed to be, I think, 11 sites to be sampled, and we have no data whatsoever on what the PFAS concentrations were. So I think you really got to take a look at the counties with the highest impacts. That's it.
Okay, thank you. And we are, each of these sites are unique, and as we look at them, we will follow the data. We're starting off with, like I mentioned, the drinking water wells if they're nearby. But the next step is certainly groundwater analysis, trying to figure out where these plumes go, determine whether or not they're actually venting to surface water. So we will follow the data and make sure that they are doing everything they need to do under the law.
Did you do anything for the city of Wyandotte on their PFAS issues?
I'm not involved with any of the drinking water sampling per se. From my end, if we have a residential well or a water intake that's near the site, that was, a reason for us to bump up our look into that site to see whether or not it could be a potential contributor to those issues. So I think if you're looking for specific groundwater or drinking water data, that's not a question that I can answer. Sorry.
I have a question.
Sure.
I was wondering, can we get a copy of these sites that are low, medium, and high priority to make sure that they are sites that some of us might have a concern with?
Sure. I can get those to Steve and Kelly, and they can distribute.
Thank you.
We'd be glad to.
Any other questions out there?
Jim, is there anything in the chat?
Let me take a look. Pollitt dump, aka Brighton Township dump on the list and category. So the Brighton Township dump I know is actually a dump that is not one of our sites. It's actually a site that is overseen by our remediation division. I know it's a site, but I don't know where they're at because it's a different division.
This is AJ Burback. Is there any sort of cross index? How many of the sites are already listed as MPART sites? Are all the medium and high already on the list, or I guess what subsection? How many? What's the overlap?
So they only get listed on the MPART site. All right, they only get listed on the MPART site once we have data that shows that it's above a cleanup criteria, the groundwater drinking water criteria specifically. So, you know, we've sampled a bunch of sites, or we got data back on a bunch of sites. It looks like at this point, I think 29 of the sites that we've got data back on are MPART sites. So I'm not sure if that answered your question or not.
I think that does, and it sounds like when you get samples back, to the extent that there's exceedances, those are also going to appear on the MPART list. So thank you.
Yep.
Hey, Jim, this is Connie again. I just have another question. Do you ever have an Eagle employee or an MPART person observing when the landfill takes their samples? Because it really sounds like, you know, a fox in the chicken coop, kind of where you have the potentially responsible parties doing their own sampling, their own delineation. And of all the project reports I've ever read from consultants, there's a lot of misrepresentations. So I'm not sure if that's such a good idea.
Well, you bring up a great point. We actually do have district geologists go out and observe the sampling activities as they occur. Not everybody does, but you know, we try to get out there enough to let them know that we're watching. And at times we will also collect our own duplicate sample and run it to our own lab just to see if the data jives with what they're getting. I think also, you know, we do rely on the fact that a number of the firms that are doing this work, you know, their reputations are on the line when they're doing this. It's not, yes, they're getting paid by the company, but, you know, I think the firms are reputable enough that they, you know, wouldn't go down that path because it would cost them not only their reputation, but probably a number of lawsuits as well. You bring up a great point, and we do get out there and split sample and oversee enough that I hope it gets the message out there that we're watching.
Good.
I have one more question. This is Brandy.
Sure, Brandy, go ahead.
Yes, I heard you say that the remediation department is separate. Does that mean that you do not oversee the landfills that accept the chemicals and all the soil from the Superfund and brownfield sites?
So we oversee any landfill in the state of Michigan that is licensed to take solid waste. So if a site is being cleaned up and their soils, you know, are going to a landfill in Michigan, that landfill would be regulated by us.
Okay.
The actual work at that site, as far as the cleanup, might be overseen by my sister division, you know, remediation division, as opposed to my division. But, you know, we certainly would be overseeing the landfill, and, you know, we'd be looking at their groundwater data to make sure that nothing's leaking from that landfill, or if something is, we'd be setting them down the path.
And who really oversees the disposal from the soil, from the brownfields and the superfunds to make sure that it's being disposed of properly?
So the disposal, if they're going to try to send, well, any kind of waste to a landfill, it has to they have to prove to the landfill that it's solid waste and not something that would be designated as, like, for example, hazardous waste. So
Someone needs to mute if you're not talking. Thanks.
thank you. Yeah, so kind of forgot where I was at there. The landfills will request certain analysis to get the waste brought into their particular facility. They certainly don't want to be taking something that's going to be designated as hazardous waste. That's going to cause them a lot of problems and a lot of money down the road. So the facility, in conjunction with the landfill, will figure out what kind of sampling needs to occur to make the demonstration to the landfill that it can go there legally.
Thank you.
Yep.
All right, any other questions for Jim?
Yeah, one last question, Jim. This is Connie. When are you going to be looking at Woodland Meadows mini landfills in Wayne County?
Well, let's take a look here. Let me pull up the spreadsheet. I don't remember if Woodland Meadows is a high priority site.
I think it's medium.
Let's see here. Yeah, so Woodland Meadows, we've got the Van Buren location and one that they call Woodland Meadows South, and they're both a medium priority site. Let's see if anything's happened on those yet. I don't have anything on my spreadsheet as far as like letters being sent. And again, though, that's going to, that's going to be kind of the call of the district and based on their workload and what's going on down there. So, but, you can, if you want, I can get you the site lead's name on those and you can contact them directly.
I'll contact who, the district or Woodland Meadows?
Our district geologist, you could contact him and find out where it's at on his priority list or his workload.
Okay, I'll email you for that, okay?
Very good.
Thanks.
Yep. You have my email address. I think it's on the last page of the slides. I think I've got my contact information. Steve, can you bump down one more slide?
There you go.
Yep, phone number and email.
All right. Well, Jim, thanks very much for taking some time out of your evening to join us and educate us a little bit on the landfill initiative. And it's a very deliberate process, and I think it's just one example of all the different investigation work that's going on across the state. And here you've got a succinct universe that you know a lot about, so you're able to prioritize those. And the work's not done, right?
It's just starting.
Yeah, exactly. And just a couple other points too, while Jim is still with us here, is that he's working, in that separate stakeholder group we have with the landfills and the wastewater treatment plants to try to better understand how going forward to manage the PFAS and landfill leachate, how to limit how much gets in the leachate, and then how to manage leachate that's generated from these landfills. Because Jim, I think the MWRA study of, 35 landfills a couple of years ago, pretty much they all have PFAS in their leachate. And so it's just a matter of, how well it's managed on site. And that's how you're prioritizing if they've already got a release to look for PFAS now as well.
Correct.
And then in Jim's division, they also oversee Michigan's hazardous waste landfill, the only commercial hazardous waste landfill where some of the cleanup waste from PFAS sites has gone because a lot of the solid waste landfills have not wanted to deal with the higher concentrations of PFAS in soils and sludges, for example. So some of that has ended up at the hazardous waste landfill, and that's also overseen by the group that sits right next to Jim. All right. Well, I think what we'll do then is we'll move on, and also Connie, too, to your point as well, questions about any follow-up sampling that's been done to track down what's happened with the Wyandotte system. We've got some results in, and I think Ian Smith is on here. I can't see who all is on right now, but perhaps it might be a phone call that you could have with him for what we've done and some of the retesting. And we're starting to get some of the data in from some of the sampling that's been done in the area that Mike Alexander talked to you about as well. So we constantly have data coming in to track down sources of contamination and better understand throughout that whole watershed there. So, all right.
All right, Steve,
Well, let's jump in.
Me?
Yep. Hey,
Anything
thanks
else
very
for
much,
me, or am I
Jim.
done? All right, have a good night, everybody.
All right. Thank you. All right, let's jump into some of the follow-up items, and I think this was Sandy's suggestion that the last meeting is, just to bring everybody back up to speed, for where we left off, and Jim's presentation was one of the things that kind of followed from questions that Connie precipitated at the last meeting. And, also the residential well initiative, we had a really good conversation last time. I got a lot of good input from you. That's a work in progress. We're never as far along in some of these things as we'd like to be, but we continue to try to build that. And I definitely will keep this group informed as we go forward in trying to, figure out the best way to inform residents who may never be part of an MPART investigation. If they've got their own well, what sort of considerations should they have about, potential risks, and what are their options for addressing those, including if they get their own sample, if they initiate a test, how to do that, where to do that, what labs, use which analytical methods, and then how do you interpret the results and make sure that they're aware of the resources that the state has. And I think I mentioned to you before, not only we're seeking input from you, but also from our local health partners and some of the associations out there as well that deal with residents on all kinds of environmental issues across the state. And also subcommittees, that was one of the other follow-up items, and as you can see, that's on the agenda, so we'll have some reporting out from our subcommittees here in a few minutes. And I don't know, did anybody have any other follow-up items specifically that I didn't list here?
This is Sandy Winslow. I just wondered, because Connie has brought up the last couple of meetings about the concerns about contamination of the water in that Metro Detroit, Wayne County area. I'm sorry, Connie, I think that's where you're talking about. That area is pretty highly populated, and I wonder if we could do something, I don't know, have a better understanding of what's going on there. I don't want to see that be, neglected, because she's done a good job at bringing that up, and we don't get a big answer on that.
Yeah.
So maybe for the next meeting, if somebody could talk about the level of contamination in that area. And
so why don't we do this? And again, data is constantly coming in, and sampling plans, stretch out over the year. And let me check with our Water Resources Division folks and see when they think they'll have more information to put out on what they've done. I think we've kind of covered it at a high level, some of the plans. And Connie, I think Mike Alexander got back with you on some of the plans going forward and some of the data. And but yeah, let me check with our staff and see what they have. And that's one area of the state where we're looking amongst many others, and see what we've got.
I understand you guys are booked and you're spread in a million directions, but that's such a heavily populated area that besides just drinking water, I know there are a ton of people that fish over there and eat that, and it just seems like a neglected area in this conversation. Connie, I'm not trying to jump on you here. You could probably say more about what you're looking for than I can, if she's still on the call.
Hey, Sandy, I really appreciate your support here. I really do, because at the time I feel like we're just talking to the wind and nobody listens. So I appreciate your advocacy. Thank you.
All right. Well, no, thanks for that. And again, let me check with staff and see, what we've got. I don't want anyone to think that we're not looking and that we're not prioritizing based upon first and foremost drinking water impacts. And we've got a systematic process here, not to overly defend it, but I think you'll find it's one of the most successful in the country on trying to rapidly identify and reduce the highest priority exposures. And so anyway, let me see what I've got from our staff, and then we can add that to the agenda either next time or when they think they'll have that data. I'm thinking it'll be sooner rather than later. And all right. Well, I wanted to talk a little bit about standards. As you all know, beginning of August, the promulgation of the drinking water standards was final. And you've all seen these numbers before, from 6 to 400,000 parts per trillion for public water supplies. And that's probably maybe not the best term to use. There's some technical terms in the Drinking Water Act, and Ian and Chris have come in and talked with this group before on how those rules apply to the different types of systems. But one of the things that we're noticing, throughout the state, in staff and the regulated community, is some confusion over what those standards mean when it comes to cleanups. And so, as you all recall, we had specifically 70 parts per trillion for PFOA and PFOS in any combination in groundwater, that was the cleanup criteria based upon that EPA lifetime health advisory. And so that was groundwater cleanup criteria protective of drinking water. And also that we had a GSI value, that's the groundwater surface water interface, based upon protecting surface water. So when the MCLs were promulgated, when they became effective on August 3rd, that changed the groundwater cleanup criteria protective of drinking water to 8 parts per trillion PFOA and 16 parts per trillion PFOS. But if you look back on this list here, there's 7 other compounds. Those are not enforceable cleanup criteria. We have to go through a rulemaking under Part 201, that's our environmental cleanup statute, in order for those to be applicable. Now, you've also heard from our Department of Health and Human Services folks that those other numbers help inform some of their public health decision making as they, try to evaluate risk, but they're not an enforceable cleanup criteria. So we'll continue to speak about all 7, but when it comes to the cleanup criteria, right now it's 8 and 16 for PFOA and PFOS. And I just wanted to take a moment and see if you guys had any questions about that, the applicability of it. And same thing for surface water criteria. We still have the 420 parts per trillion if a surface water is a drinking water source for PFOA, and 12 parts per trillion or 11 parts per trillion PFOS if it's a drinking water source. So I can't see if anybody has any hands raised. Yes.
Dan Brown and Tony had their hand raised back when you were talking about the follow-up item.
Oh, okay. I'm sorry. I can't see those. So if
Dan
somebody
Brown,
wants,
if you want to start.
Sure. Yeah, I raised my hand. I know it's hard to see the little icon when
but
when
as
you're
a
talking.
presenter, sorry, but as a presenter, I can't see any of it.
Yeah,
so.
No, I didn't want to interrupt, and my comment wasn't too pressing. So, to the point that Connie was talking about, this is something I've been struggling with over maybe the last couple months as we get different requests or questions about. Essentially, if a resident moves into an area or if they're concerned about what's around them generally in terms of PFAS, should they have their well tested, what's their exposure risk in their waterways around them, just generally what's their risk in their part of the world. there's a huge amount of great data and narrative on the website right now. And what I'm struggling with is that because so much of the data and so many of the investigations are spread across different divisions, pulling together a narrative like that, takes some time. And because the data is changing quickly and new information is coming in, it's just hard to stay on top of that. So one broad point is just, I don't know how technically to do this, but what would be really helpful is to have just sort of an aggregate map of, here are the fish advisories, here are the contaminated groundwater sites, here are the sites that are discharging to surface water, and to have all of those indicated on a single map or in some sort of searchable database. And I know that there's big parts of that are out there and are ready, but having some sort of aggregation of all that information based on location would be really helpful. What are the concerning things around your neighborhood if you're a user searching for that? So that was my question. But the first question I had, the next piece was something you were just talking about. With in terms of what do these standards mean for remediation, and I just want to point out, I think this is a very logical next step for those of us that are looking for, advocacy to the legislature. Is just it's now that we know that these things are harmful and we have drinking water standards for them, it would certainly make sense to begin the rulemaking process for Part 201. Or other applicable, cleanup rules. So that's something I think a lot of us on this meeting should start thinking about. As the next step is to sort of apply those other 5 chemicals to cleanup criteria because they're not included with PFOA and PFAS. So I'll stop there.
Okay, and just real quick, Dan, I think what you're talking about, it'd be nice to have all this data aggregated and so you could go by location and find it. That's exactly what we're talking about, and AJ's been talking with us about, but that's the residential well initiative too, and working with our GSI or GIS folks, excuse me, and others to try to figure out a way to do that. It's a pretty massive undertaking, but that's definitely on the radar. That's on our wish list. So thanks for bringing that up. And AJ?
No, this is Tony.
Oh, I'm sorry. It was Tony. I'm sorry.
That's all right. And Steve, I don't want to take up a whole lot of time. At the July meeting, I submitted 3 questions in the box, and then I also emailed them to you and Kelly this past Thursday. We don't need to go into it tonight, but I would just like to have this followed up.
Okay, thanks, Tony. All right, now was anybody else?
Bill Barnett.
Go ahead, Bill. Bill, are you on mute?
Here we go.
There you go.
Thank you. Sorry about that.
No worries.
Michigan standards for remediation, 8 parts per trillion of PFOA. Let's assume a private landowner or well user has 6 parts per trillion. Does that put him or he or she in the remediation standard because it's over 50% of 8? Or are they just going to have a cutoff at 8 parts per trillion to start off?
Well, I guess there's 2 questions there. One is it of concern? And secondly, what can drive a cleanup? And so I think anybody who has, a 6 parts per trillion or a 4 or whatnot, they can always call and talk with a toxicologist at DHHS and their local health department about what that means. And, the toxicologist hotline is always open for that. And secondly, is what do we do with that data? And, there's always questions, okay, is it reproducible? Is it in an area where we're doing an investigation? And a lot of those decisions on next steps depend on what we know about what's going on in the area. And this is part of what we want to make sure that we include in this residential well initiative is to put out there to residents, if you get a result and you initiated that test, here's what it means and here's how the state of Michigan will respond to that, and here's all the resources that you and we have available. Does that help?
It does, but I was just curious, are they subject to testing, and should they be testing themselves if they're over that 50% mark? I guess I'm looking for clarification of the 50%.
Oh, okay. Well, so from a cleanup perspective, and again, it depends if this is part of an environmental cleanup and investigation or whether this is a residential well result. And again, our advice or our recommendations to the residential well owner will be dependent upon what we know. These standards themselves don't trigger a residential well owner to have to do monitoring. But typically what you'll see is we get a monitoring well result from like a landfill. We start looking to see if that is migrating off-site, that contamination is migrating off-site, and then we evaluate the results that we see in a residential well and then make recommendations to the resident based upon how these values fall relative to any number of criteria, including all 7 of those criteria on the other slide and other values that DHHS might look at. But it wouldn't require them as a residential well owner to have to monitor.
Thank you.
Yep. Okay. Any other questions? Any other hands raised? If not, we'll jump on here. Just a quick reminder for all of the regional webinars. They start tomorrow, and you can see the dates here. I know many of you are already aware, and just in case you need it, the link is here for the press release, and in that press release has a link to the Eagle calendar where you click on whatever date that you're interested in and it registers you for that webinar. So, again, the purpose of these is to, basically introduce, in many cases, communities that have never really dealt with the PFAS issue as much as you have. And they may not have ever had a location that, exceeded any of the state cleanup criteria. And so these are going to be relatively high-level conversations about here's what PFAS are, here's what the state of Michigan's doing about them, here's potential health effects. Here are the locations that we found, and in many cases, most of these are ones that are new to the block, new kids on the block, because we have those lower criteria. That when we were comparing to 70 parts per trillion PFOA, PFOS, they didn't qualify as a site, but now 30. Well, I think now it's almost 40 some of them do, because we've been adding some. So anyway, we need to do any offsite investigations. The intent is to then come back and do a community-specific, site-specific webinar in those communities where we see the need to come in and do investigation work of private wells, for example.
Steve,
and
Bill
here,
Barnett has his hand up again.
Yeah, Bill.
I apologize. I sent an email out to everybody. I noticed the media was covering a story from Belmont that the Eagles released the blood contamination with PFAS, and that the levels were higher in those areas. Not always, but there's some not alarming, but concerning numbers. It just says to plow forward, keep doing what you're doing. But just wanted to let everyone know in advance, there's been some news today on the blood contamination testing that was done like in 18 and 2019, I think. That's all. I'm sorry to interrupt.
Yep. No, thanks for bringing that up. And I know we've got some DHHS folks on here that, as we go through a round robin with the state agencies, they might fill in some of the blanks there for us as well.
Yes, we will. Thank you.
Yep. And so anyway, this is just, the number of sites that we had on August 3rd was 138, because we added 39 new sites just because of the change in criteria. And since then, we continue to do investigation work and are finding more locations. During these webinars, these regional webinars, we're going to include all of those within the region, whether they were the initial ones that became sites on August 3rd or any that we found since then. We're making sure that we've got all of the write-ups for these sites, the individual site write-ups that you're familiar with, posted on the web before we do any of these regional webinars. And that includes the initial conversations with local health and municipal officials and some of the special interest groups in these communities so that they're aware even before we actually do the regional webinars. So just, and again, you know, we will get back into a more routine rhythm of site-by-site webinars, but we, you know, as we've had the conversation here with you, we wanted to lump these just so we could get the word out and being mindful of everybody's time in these communities. So if anybody had any questions on these, you can see the purple dots here are the ones that were exceeding the old criteria, and you see all these little orange squares are now total of 45 that exceed 8 parts per trillion PFOA or 16 parts per trillion PFOS. All right. So let's go through and have an opportunity here for any of the agencies. If they don't have any updates, they don't have to, but I know most are on this call. Wanted to provide that opportunity. Just take a minute or two. And we'll start out with DHHS.
Yes, good evening, everyone. I just wanted to let you know a couple things. One, as Bill already let you know, the North Kent County Exposure Assessment Preliminary Report was announced today and is out. We will be doing webinars on Wednesday, September 16th, so next Wednesday. We'll have 2 sessions, one from noon to 1:30 and one from 6:30 to 8 p.m. So you can register for those if you want. I know there is also an evening regional meeting for the Bay County area as well at the same time. But there's 2 options for sessions for the North Kent County Exposure Assessment Preliminary Report. We've also been continuing to do resampling of private residential wells. I think we've recently completed resampling in Alpena, Ascota, and Grand for Carl's retreading. We have resampling going on in Grayling, Hartford, for Dewell, and Chrysler Scio. We've got some sampling going on. And then we're planning on additional resampling starting September 21st for Cooper Township and the Helmer-Dickman area. That's what I've got if there's any questions.
Thanks, Deb. Any questions for Deb? All right.
Yeah, Steve, this is Dave Wynn.
Yeah, Dave. Go ahead.
It's what you said. You said you completed all the residential well testing in Ascota. Do you have any idea when the residents are going to receive the results? I had my well tested on June the 25th, and here we are almost close to 3 months, and I still haven't had a letter sent to my home. When's this going to happen?
So you should be getting them soon, Dave. I can't give you the exact date. I'll have to check on that. If you want to send me an email, I'll get you an answer tomorrow. I know that we wanted to make sure we had all the results back before we sent people letters, just in case we had a neighbor that had a result that was surprising, that we could give people recommendations based on not just their result, but also neighboring results.
Yeah, but my neighbors already have their copies of their. Matter of fact, I'm looking at a copy of their results right now. I haven't seen mine, and okay. I don't believe so. Yeah, is this Deb?
Yeah, this is Deb. I'm sorry, I didn't know. Okay. I don't know why that's the case, but I'll follow up on that tomorrow.
All right. Do you want me to send you? I have your email address. Do you want me to send you an email? I sent one to Sue Minetti today, but I didn't know if you're the ones. I'll send you an email. Same thing.
Yeah. If you send me an email, I'll follow up on it tomorrow. Okay.
Thank you. Thank you.
No problem.
Deb, this is Connie, can I ask a quick question? What was the summary or the bottom line of the risk assessment that you just released in Kent County, the blood or whatever?
So this was an exposure assessment. This was a preliminary report looking at what the results of the blood levels for the population there compared to a national comparison values called the National Health and Nutrition Examination Survey, where they do look at different pollutants in people's blood, so we could compare. And we found that especially for 3 of the types of PFAS that are in the groundwater there, we saw very high levels in people's blood, where we were seeing much higher levels for PFOS, PFHXS, and PFOA. And we saw a little bit of higher than we expected for EFOSA, EFOSA. So we are seeing some high levels in some people. As you know, we're already planning further exposure and health studies that will include both North Kent County, Parchment, and Cooper Township. So we're already doing the follow-up. There will be further analysis of the data collected as part of the exposure assessment. So we'll look at comparing the blood levels to drinking water levels and to other self-reported exposure levels. So other things they could have been exposed to, such as eating fish from the Rogue River, or things that could impact their PFAS levels by decreasing them, such as donating blood. So there's different things that we'll be looking at for future analyses.
And Harvey has a question.
Ken, go ahead.
As that expands, because I'm in northern Kent County, as that expands and more testing is done, the thing we've been asking for is to have people in the Plainfield Township municipal water system included in some of those testing. Is that something that's going to happen in that next set of tests?
So the focus for the North Kent County component, so Rockford, Belmont area, for the Michigan PFAS exposure and health study is for people with private wells that have been tested. I understand your concern. We're going to pick up. So there's a lot of people across the state that have had elevated levels in their drinking water. We can't do everyone. So we're focusing on those areas where we have the highest exposure levels so that we can maximize the ability to see a relationship between blood levels and health outcomes, changes in health outcomes, so that we can see if there's that association there. And so we want to focus on those areas where we have the highest levels. I understand wanting to be involved in this study, but we want to make sure that we're maximizing the ability to see that relationship.
And would that also exclude the Rockford municipal system?
So my understanding for the Rockford municipal system was that another thing that we are considering is the fact that that system, my understanding was it was getting water from the Rogue River over 20 years ago, if I remember correctly. So because of how PFAS leaves the body, and it has a half-life that's, for some of these chemicals, that is 3 to 6 years, a lot of it would be gone. So being able to see that association with the blood levels, elevated blood levels, and health impacts, we could mischaracterize someone with low blood levels because it's been over 20 years since they drank the water, and having a health outcome. So we're associating a health outcome that may have been related to that's now looking at low blood levels. So we're mischaracterizing what that health outcome could be if we look at people that were exposed a long time ago and their blood levels have dropped. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it surely does. Thank you very much.
You're welcome. Any other questions, or we can move on?
Okay.
Okay, thanks.
Thank you very much, Deb. And Chris Kosmowski, are you with us still? And any updates from MDARD?
Yes, I'm still here, Steve, and good evening, everyone. For those of you who may not be aware, crop samples were taken at a few farms in Michigan, and they are in the process of being analyzed by two different labs, the state lab as well as the FDA lab, and we expect to have results from all of that by the end of this year, beginning of next year sometime. So that's all I really have to report.
Okay, thanks. Any questions for Chris? All right. That's one area where we don't have a great understanding yet is, PFAS and some of the crops in an agricultural setting. And so kind of at the tip of the iceberg on that. So thanks for that update. And Tammy Newcomb with DNR, any updates for the group?
Sure, just a couple. Good evening, everybody. So I want to say crops are important to wildlife too. So you should all know that we're working closely with ag to understand the results of those of the sampling that they're doing, so we can take a look at that and potential impact on wildlife as well. Just want to report that we are finally through the disease testing part of our second round of sampling deer in the Ascota area. I think I reported out to this group before that our DNR lab had shut down due to COVID. We still aren't yet open. MSU was able to open a little bit earlier, and so they kindly helped us out and completed those disease testing. They have to be tested for bovine tuberculosis and chronic wasting disease before the samples can go to the DHHS lab. So I will be personally making a delivery at the end of this week. So hopefully we can get those tested for PFAS. So just as a reminder, this was our second round focusing in the do not eat advisory area. In the Ascota area for deer, and we were able to take some additional deer directly out of the Clark's Marsh area in addition to the surrounding area. So we took 40 more deer from that effort to help DHHS in its risk assessment for this continuation and status of that do not eat advisory. We also are very excited to say that Purdue University, who received funding from the DNR to do an aquatic life investigation, so sort of an ecosystem or a food web study in the Clark's Marsh area, was able to go out and get their field samples the last couple of weeks. And they were able to start up very quickly after being put on hold for several months. So they got their permits in order and got permission from the Forest Service and went out and did their samples. And they're sampling everything from algae all the way up through turtles. They are on the docket to present to the Ascota area community in October. Generally just the intention and purpose of their study, not so much results yet. They will be doing a couple of different things. It's just not just a matter of reporting out the numbers or the data from each of the organisms, but it's in putting together a model to help us understand the rate of transmission in the different levels of the food web, as well as where that PFAS may reside within that food web. And so what that will help us do then is be able to take a look at the called fate and transport studies and be able to take a look at what realistic expectations are and what the risk is, both ecologically and then helping guide us in terms of thinking about risk for human health for DHHS as well. So we're very excited about that. At the same time, MSU, they're a little bit further behind, but they also received an award from a DNR request for proposals to do the same type of work in the Huron River watershed. So looking at that same type of information in a watershed that's got both standing water and flowing water in it to help us understand the potential dynamics out there as well. So we're very excited to have that project started up too. That's all I have for tonight, Steve.
Okay, thanks, Tammy. Any questions for Tammy? All right. Then Kevin Selmeyer, State Fire Marshal, any update for the group?
Hey, good evening, everybody. Kevin Selmeyer, I'm the Michigan State Fire Marshal, and my job has been to be the liaison between the fire service and the MPART group for really about the last 2.5 years. As we worked through that process, one of the things that we worked on is that there's a lot of fire departments that have a lot of Class B AFFF foam. A lot of them got it through, we're finding through donations. But also a lot of it was purchased over the years for what would happen if we were to have a plane crash, a tanker turnover, or a fire involving flammable liquids. So we know that there was a fair amount of accumulation, and we can prove it in the sense that we've collected 48,000 gallons of AFFF foam really in about the last 9 months. So US Ecology was awarded a contract out of Detroit. They have been moving across the state. They've been collecting the foam. And as of a week ago, Monday, we had over 48,000 gallons. We still have some more to get around the state. We've been working hard with the fire service to let them know that if you have this older foam that's around and you want to get rid of, this is their opportunity to turn it in. And through a Eagle funded initiative, this foam is being collected and taken out of service here in the Michigan Fire Service. Also, we're involved with DHHS. They're actually getting ready to do a study on firefighters and foam. So one of the things that it's a correlation between firefighters being exposed to using foam. So just a few of the things that I continue to work with as part of MPART. And if anyone has any questions, I'd be happy to take them at this time. Thanks for the opportunity to share with you what we're doing here in Michigan. And I see Ken Harvey's raising his hand, Steve.
Ken?
Yeah, just as you're talking about the foam, are you also looking into what might be in the firefighters' turnout gear?
The work that we're doing so much hasn't been on the turnout gear. You're right. There is components of PFAS that's actually in the waterproofing of our gear. One of the studies that there have been some studies that have been done they're saying for a long-term effect on firefighters, you would have to be in your gear every day greater than 8 hours in one day. One of the things that this waterproofing that's in the fire gear is actually required in the NFPA standard for when they build the gear. That's the National Fire Protection Association, which sets standards. So there has been some work done. The study that we're doing, though, is really looking at have firefighters been exposed to foam by using it, and then what are some of the effects from that use. I don't know if that answered your question, but that's the part of the study that we're working on.
Thank you.
Yeah, you bet.
All right.
Hey, thanks, Steve.
Hey, thank you very much.
Yeah.
Yes. Could I just ask a quick question of Kevin?
Sure.
All of the firefighting foam, the thousands and thousands of gallons that you are collecting via US Ecology, how are you going to dispose of it?
The foam is actually being collected and it's actually being sent out to Idaho, is where the foam is actually going to be processed.
So is it going to be incinerated?
It is not going to be incinerated. It is not going to be incinerated.
Is it going to be landfilled?
Yeah, I can jump in here.
You can jump in there, Steve? Okay.
Yeah. It's going out to a US Ecology licensed hazardous waste facility in Idaho. It's in a very arid region. Originally, they were going to dispose it in Wayne Disposal in Belleville, but out of concerns over leachate volumes, they wanted to go to the most arid place in the country that they have a landfill that won't generate much leachate. And so they're going to stabilize. What they're doing is they're stabilizing the material and then landfilling it in that regulated landfill out there. So basically the intent is to not perpetuate that cycle of PFAS recirculating throughout the ecosystem because of getting into leachate. Hopefully that helps, Guy.
Yes, it does. Thanks.
Yep, you bet. Thanks for the question. All right, I know we're running over here a little bit. Thanks, Kevin, very much for that update. And I don't know if anybody had an opportunity to join from Department of Military and Veterans Affairs. All right. And how about from Department of Transportation? All right. Well, thank the agencies for the updates. And real quick, I need to set up a separate call, I think, with folks who are interested in participating in the panel at the PFAS Summit at the end of October. We've got a 45-minute slot to, put a residents, a citizens, perspective on all of the work that's going on around, the state and from investigating and remediating PFAS. And, you guys are an important part of the, the whole picture of PFAS response here in Michigan. So I appreciate those of you who've, volunteered. And I don't know if I missed anybody in an email or in putting this list together. We've got a good group here for sure. And I think what we got to do is figure out what sort of format, how do we want to do this, and any key focus points, and make sure that everybody has an opportunity to participate. It's a 45-minute slot, so I know we've got a lot of folks here. I will likely be the one to moderate it unless there's some other conflict that comes up. So anyway, with that said, how about if we just do this, being mindful of time, if I send you all an email with a couple of evenings, maybe 5:30 to 6:30 or 5 to 6, something like that. See if we can find some time over the next couple of weeks to have a conversation on how we might want to do this. Unless there's any objections, I think that's what we'll do, is schedule a planning call. We've got some time, and I know you all are really good at this, so I'm not thinking we have to do a whole lot of homework.
That sounds good here, Steve. Just looking at that schedule in 45 minutes, that's just to get those of us that agree to be panelists, that's probably 3 to 5 minutes per person if we broke it out evenly. So just trying to get it in mind that we all need to be brief, because I know some of us, myself included, can talk longer than that.
Can't we all, right? Well, it's an important subject to talk about, so I appreciate that. All right.
Hey, Steve.
Yes.
It's Randy. I just want to remind everybody, I think tomorrow night is the first new MPART PFAS site webinar.
Yep.
And we have a bunch of them coming up. Northern Michigan is the 17th. I think there's another one before that. So if you can make it and want to know what's going up in Cadillac or Gaylord or the UP, we have 5 different sites to talk about. There's other ones going around, for the rest of the state. Just wanted to put that out there. Thank you, Steve.
Yep. Thanks, Randy. Appreciate that reminder. All right. So I think what we have not had a chance to do here yet is to talk about subcommittee's progress. And I guess I'll just, quickly defer to, AJ and Ken. Do you have any report outs you want to do with the group right now, or do you want to save those for the next time?
Yeah, this is Ken. We had several meetings over the past month. The one that was just concluded today, we hammered out our mission statement, and we have several ideas on how to engage the public going forward. And we'll be working on those. To spare time, I won't go over them.
And with respect to the communications and web outreach, we had a very good, lengthy meeting, I guess a couple of months ago now, with some suggestions. Probably the primary one is it'd be great if we could just enter an address or a zip code and have a user of the MPART website get information about their specific location, or at least specific zip code. That's being considered. We've taken a little step towards that already, but bottom line is folks at MPART have been, and Eagle have been so busy trying to get all these new sites on board. We certainly, that's the priority right now. And, probably sometime between this and the next meeting, we'll hopefully have a chance to sit down and talk about some of the other suggestions that our subcommittee has made, and we'll report out on that next meeting.
Well, and thank you both on that. Let's make sure that we put enough time on the agenda for next month and early in the agenda, so you both can report to, the full committee here on what you're thinking, and brief them on it, have some conversation, and then see where we go from there. I really appreciate all the work you guys are doing. Your leadership on both of these areas is really important to us. So Kelly, that's a note to self here. Let's see if we can put these subcommittees early in the agenda, and make sure that we allow ample time for them to report back to the whole group. All right. So we have the next meeting is October 13th here. That's the second Tuesday of the month, and I know we have these scheduled throughout the the rest of the year, and we'll start getting more of these on the calendar. And we don't have much time for community sharing round robin, but just let me put the offer out there. Is there anything that we need to remind folks of for the good of the group here, just like Randy did a moment ago? And I'm going to start with Brandy, because this is kind of your first meeting, and want to make sure you have an opportunity just to say hi to the group and see if there's anything going on in Kalamazoo you want to make sure they're all aware of.
Hi, my name is Brandy Crawford Johnson. Hi, everyone. I'm just, we have about 70 toxic release facilities. So I'm just investigating a lot of them right now, but I am concerned about the parchment PFAS, because they switched over to the Kalamazoo City water system, and we saw what happened when that's been done in the past. And, you and I, Steve, have discussed facility graphic packaging and how they did find PFAS, but you said that you found out they were not reproducible. But so I'm just really concerned about the PFAS from that facility right now.
Okay. Well, thank you very much for all the questions you've had for our staff, and and I appreciate you working with us to get the information you need, and look forward to working with you going forward. So
you as well. Thank you.
You bet. All right. Anybody else have anything want to bring up for the good of the group? I can see some of the conversation stuff now, I think. All right. All right, everybody.
Steve?
Yes.
Gail Dugan, want to appreciate your prompt response back to our grant writers in Allegan County. I thank you very much for that information that you sent out to him.
Oh yeah, you bet. Yeah, don't hesitate to reach out to us when you guys need some information. And sometimes I'm not the best with my emails, but I do try. And Kelly's much better than I am. All right. Well, Kelly, anything else we need to wrap up?
Not that I can think of.
All right, folks. Well, hey, thanks very much for joining, and look forward to chatting with many of you between now and the next meeting. I'll get some stuff set up for that citizens panel. And again, thanks very much for sharing your evening, and we'll see all of you here at the latest next month, second Tuesday. Have a good one.
Thanks everyone. Take care.
Thank you.